I had a folder under my arm, my good shirt on. The blue one Noah said made me look like somebody. And my son walking beside me down a hallway that cost more per square foot than my rent. He was 10. He had a library book in his backpack and a granola bar in his jacket pocket, and he was completely unbothered by any of it. That was the thing about Noah. Marble lobbies, parking lots, hardware stores. Same kid. Head up, eyes curious. Not a scrap of performance in him. I'd thought twice about bringing him. School was on a modified schedule, that Wednesday teacher's professional day, half the day off, and I hadn't sorted out the backup yet. My sitter was at her sister's wedding in Raleigh. My mother was 3 hours north. I called 2 neighbors and got 2 voicemails. So Noah came with me, library book and all, with a clear set of instructions. Sit in whatever chair they point you to. Read your book. Don't interrupt, he said. Got it, Dad, like I'd asked him to tie his shoes. The firm was called Meridian Capital. 15 floors up. A corner suite with glass walls and a view of the city that I'd probably never see again after that day. I'd been brought in as a technical consultant, not a partner, not a principal, not anyone with equity on the table. Just the man who understood the navigation algorithm well enough to answer questions the lawyers couldn't. That algorithm was mine, not in the way they knew. I'd written the core of it 11 years earlier at a company called Arcturus Systems, a small aerospace startup that went, under 2 years in, took my severance and my goodwill, and sold its IP portfolio to 4 different buyers for whatever they could get. I was 29. I had a newborn at home and a lease I could barely cover. I didn't have the money or the energy to fight for what was mine. Life moved on. Arcturus's buyers got absorbed into other companies, which got absorbed into others. The algorithm got wrapped into a navigation platform called Helios, licensed to avionics companies across the industry, and quietly grew into something worth $400 million. I'd done odd jobs since. Some tutoring, some contract engineering work, nothing glamorous. I raised Noah. I watched the Helios platform grow from a distance, occasionally thinking about what I'd signed away, mostly not, because what good does that kind of thinking do? Then 8 months ago, a woman named Dara Voss had tracked me down. She was the CEO of a mid-sized aerospace firm called Centaur Systems that was negotiating a full acquisition of the Helios platform. Her IP attorneys had traced the algorithm's ownership chain all the way back through 2 holding companies, through Arcturus's liquidation, through my original employment contract, which had a clause, buried in the fine print at the time and now very much worth reading, that reserved certain fundamental authorship rights to the original creator in the event of multi-stage resale. They found me managing a tutoring center on a Tuesday afternoon. Dara Voss herself walked in, sat across from me at a table covered in algebra worksheets, and told me who she was and what she'd found. I sat with it for a long moment. I said, "My son gets out of school at 3. She said, "We can talk later." We talked for 8 months. I had my own lawyer by week 2. A patient man named Gerald who'd helped me understand exactly what the clause meant and what I was entitled to. Assert. The number was significant. Not obscene, but real. More than I'd seen in my life put together. The Meridian Capital meeting was the final step. They held the bridge financing for the Centaur acquisition. Without their sign-off, the deal didn't close. They'd asked for a technical presentation on the algorithm's architecture. Specifically, whether the authorship rights I was asserting could withstand scrutiny in the event of post-acquisition litigation. Dara Voss's legal team would present. I was there to answer the technical questions they couldn't. I had never met the Meridian partners before that morning. The one who opened the door was a man named Whitfield, senior partner, I gathered. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, suit that fit like it had been sewn onto him, the kind of handshake that is really just a statement. He looked at me, then at Noah, and his expression changed in a way he probably thought was invisible. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "we weren't expecting a guest." "Modified school schedule," I said. "He'll sit quietly." He brought a book. Noah held up the book. He wasn't being funny. He was just showing the man the evidence. Whitfield looked at the book, looked at Noah, looked at me. He didn't say anything, just held the door wider, and I brought us both inside. The room had 8 people in it, 4 from Meridian, 3 from Centaur's legal team, and Dara Voss at the far end of the table, who looked at Noah and gave him a quick, genuine smile before she looked at me and gave me a nod that meant we're almost there. I pointed Noah to a chair along the wall, away from the table. He sat down, opened his book, and was gone. The presentation took 40 minutes. Dara's team walked through the ownership chain. I walked through the architecture, the motion prediction kernel, the error correction subroutines, the specific data structures that my original code had introduced, and that every subsequent version had built on. The Meridian partners asked careful questions. I answered them. The room got progressively quieter in the way rooms do when everyone realizes the answer is clean. We were nearly done when Whitfield spoke up. He'd been quiet most of the meeting, scrolling his phone more than I'd liked. He set it down now and looked at Noah. "This is a conference room," he said. "Not a daycare." It wasn't to me. It was directed past me, at my son. Noah looked up from his book. He didn't flinch. He just looked at the man the way you look at something you don't entirely understand yet. The room was quiet in a different way now. I closed my folder. I looked at Whitfield for a moment. Not angry, not calculating, just deciding. I'd spent 11 years being the man people talked past, the man who'd signed the wrong contract at 29, and paid for it, with a decade of odd jobs and worksheets, and a son who never once heard me complain about any of it. I wasn't angry. I was just done. I said, "We're leaving." 3 words. I stood up, picked up my folder, and nodded to Noah. He closed his book without being told. He'd read the room the way only a kid raised to pay. Attention can, and stood up beside me. Darava said, "Wait." I waited, not because I had to. Because she'd spent 8 months being straight with me, and she'd earned 30 more seconds. She looked at Whitfield. Her voice was level and clear. "That man," she said, "wrote the kernel that Helios is built on. Every navigation system your firm has backed in the last 6 years runs on. Architecture he authored at 29. You just asked his 10-year-old son to leave the room." Whitfield said nothing. She kept going. "The authorship rights he's asserting have been reviewed by 4 independent IP attorneys. They hold. If you pull the bridge financing because you're uncomfortable with who wrote the algorithm, you lose this deal. Your firm misses a $400 million platform acquisition. And my attorneys will note, for the record, exactly what reason was given in this room." One of the other Meridian partners cleared his throat. He was younger than Whitfield, and his expression had the careful look of a man doing math quickly. "Ms. Voss," he said, "I think what Mr. Whitfield meant was—" "I know what he meant," she said. "I'd like to know if the rest of the room agrees with it." The room did not agree with it. I could feel that plainly. 3 of the 4 Meridian partners were looking at the table or their papers or somewhere that wasn't Whitfield's face. Whitfield said, "I apologize." He said it to me, not to Noah. That told me something. I looked at Noah. He was standing quietly beside me with his book tucked under his arm, watching the window, watching a plane draw a white line across the sky, completely at peace. I looked back at the table. I wasn't interested in gloating. I'd never been that man, and I wasn't going to start in a glass-walled conference room with my son 3 feet away. The deal mattered, not for pride, but because the number at the end of it was going to pay for Noah's education, and a house with a yard, and Gerald's invoice, and enough left over that I'd sleep differently for the first time in a decade. I said thank you. I sat back down. I nodded at Noah. He sat back down, opened his book again, and found his page. The meeting finished in 12 minutes. When we rode the elevator down, Noah stood beside me and stared at the numbers counting down above the door. "That lady was mad," he said. "She was standing up for us," I said. "Was she right about what you wrote?" "Yeah," I said, "she was right." He thought about that for a moment. Then he said, "Is that why you got fired back then? Because you wrote something good?" I looked at him. Sometimes this kid undid me quietly, without trying. "Something like that," I said. "That seems unfair." "It was," I said, "but it worked out." The elevator opened. We walked out through the marble lobby and through the heavy front doors and out into the afternoon. The city's noise, the light between buildings, the smell of late spring on a Wednesday when school's out and somewhere in a glass tower above us a deal was either closing or it wasn't. Noah slipped his hand into mine. "Can we get a sandwich?" he said. "Yeah," I said. "We can get a sandwich." We walked down the block, the folder under my arm, his hand in mine. I didn't look back at the building. I didn't need to. Whatever that room decided, I'd said what I came to say and walked out with my son and my name intact. And that was the only math that had ever really counted. Gerald called at 4:15. The bridge financing was approved. The deal would close in 30 days. I was sitting across from Noah at a diner 2 blocks from our apartment when the call came in, him working through his book, me with a coffee going cold, the afternoon sun coming through the window the way it does in early May, when everything feels like it might just be, okay. I thanked Gerald. I set my phone down. Noah looked up. He'd heard enough to read my face. "Good news," he said. "Yeah," I said. "Good news." He nodded. He went back to his book. I looked out the window at the ordinary street, the cars, the trees just going green, a dog pulling its owner towards something interesting on a corner. Nothing remarkable. Everything enough. 11 years is a long time to wait for your name to mean something on paper. But it turned out the only place it had ever really needed to mean something was in a 10-year-old's face across a diner table on a Wednesday afternoon, and it had always meant that there,